Picture a classic 1970s suburban neighborhood. You know the scene. Kids on bikes, backyard barbecues, and a brand new elementary school everyone's proud of. It really looks like the American dream, right? Well, just beneath the surface, an absolute nightmare was brewing.
See, what nobody knew was that this entire perfect-looking community was built on a foundation of pure poison. This is the story of how that poison finally came to light and how a fight in one small neighborhood, well, it ended up changing an entire nation.
And this was just a normal, working-class community. It felt safe. It felt like the kind of place you'd never, ever suspect was hiding a secret.
So, to set the scene, we're in upstate New York. The neighborhood is called Love Canal, which is kind of an ironic name. It was named after this ambitious canal project from way back in the 1890s that just never got finished. And they were. They were playing in their yards, on the school playground, just kids being kids, totally clueless about the danger that was literally just a few feet beneath their feet.
So, what was it? What was this hidden threat that was about to completely turn their lives upside down? The answer, honestly, it's just staggering.
21,000 tons of toxic chemical waste, just packed into thousands of rusting metal barrels and buried in that old abandoned ditch. It's almost impossible to even imagine that much poison.
Okay, so the big question is, how on earth does this happen, right? How does a school and an entire neighborhood get built right on top of a massive chemical dump? Well, the story is just a series of really, really bad decisions that go back decades.
This timeline really puts it into perspective. For about 50 years, that old canal was just an empty hole in the ground. But then, starting in the 40s, a company called Hooker Chemical saw it as a super convenient, cheap place to dump all their industrial waste. For over a decade, they just kept filling it up. Then, in 1953, they just covered it with a thin layer of clay and dirt. Out of sight, out of mind.
And let's be clear, we're not talking about kitchen scraps here. The stuff in those barrels was a chemical nightmare. You've got benzene, which we all know causes cancer. You've got dioxins, one of the most toxic chemicals humans have ever created. I mean, we are talking about serious poisons, capable of causing just devastating health problems.
So, with the dump now conveniently hidden, Hooker Chemical wanted to get this land off their books fast. So they went to the local Board of Education, who just so happened to be looking for land to build a new school for their growing community.
And get this, the price tag tells you everything you need to know about how badly they wanted to wash their hands of this place. They sold this huge piece of land for $1, a price that was, quite literally, too good to be true.
And here's the absolute kicker. They actually included a warning right there in the legal deed. There was a clause that said, hey, this land has chemical waste in it, and you should not, under any circumstances, break the seal on it. It was a warning that was about to be completely and totally ignored.
So, of course, once that school was built and houses started popping up all around it, the inevitable started to happen. That poison, it wasn't going to stay buried.
Pretty soon, residents started noticing these terrifying things. There was this foul chemical smell every time it rained. A thick black ooze would literally bubble up in their gardens and basements. Kids playing outside would come home with these weird rashes and painful chemical burns. And then the more sinister patterns started to emerge. A heartbreakingly high number of miscarriages, babies being born with birth defects, and clusters of rare cancers. Something was deeply, deeply wrong.
So here's why it was all happening. The very act of building the school, the playground, and the sewer lines had punctured that thin clay seal. It was like popping the lid on a container of poison. Every time there was a heavy rain, the canal would flood, and that toxic water would get pushed up and out into the soil, into people's basements, and into the air they were breathing.
The community was terrified, they were confused, and local officials just kept brushing off their complaints. But one person, one mom, decided she was not going to take no for an answer.
This is Lois Gibbs. She was a young mother, and her son Michael started having seizures and all sorts of other health problems after he started going to the 99th Street School. Yep, the one built right on top of the dump. The moment she connected his illness to that school, her entire life changed.
Now, she wasn't a scientist or a politician. She was a homemaker. But she started by just knocking on doors, trying to get her son transferred to another school. Then, she organized her neighbors into the Love Canal Homeowners Association. She literally went door to door, putting pins on a map of the neighborhood to track all the sicknesses, creating this undeniable visual proof of the crisis that the officials were ignoring. This was the birth of an activist. and really, the birth of the grassroots environmental justice movement in America.
Because of the relentless pressure from Lois Gibbs and her neighbors, this local horror story absolutely exploded into a national crisis, and its legacy would change environmental law in the United States forever.
The pressure just became too much to ignore. In 1978, New York State finally declared a state of emergency. Just a few months later, President Jimmy Carter declared a federal emergency, the first time that had ever happened for a man-made disaster. This finally unlocked the money to evacuate over 800 families, but for so many of them, the damage was already done.
The national outrage over what happened at Love Canal directly led to the creation of the Superfund Act in 1980. This was a landmark law. It gave the federal government the power to go out, find these toxic sites all over the country, and clean them up. And, this is the crucial part, it established the principle that the polluter pays. It holds corporations financially responsible for the messes they create.
When you really look back at this whole story, one thing becomes crystal clear. This was not some unavoidable accident. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a series of choices. A company chose to dump poison in a ditch, chose to sell that land for $1, and included a warning that was tragically, catastrophically ignored.
Love Canal became this powerful symbol of what can happen when profits are put before people. And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. How many other warnings are out there right now, written in the fine print, just waiting to bubble up to the surface?